The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So this morning I caught a few minutes of Dilbert creator Scott Adams' live stream, which he does from, I guess, his kitchen. And he was saying how he doesn't like how analogy is being used to equate things that Trump has done or said to things that are like, for example, the Nazis. Well, we don't have to use analogy anymore because Donald Trump is now using actual Nazi language to refer to immigrants, and his supporters are just eating it up because they can finally feel okay about harboring some of these horrible beliefs about people that are different from them. And I'm talking specifically about the word infestation. Donald Trump tweeted yesterday, Democrats are the problem. They don't care about crime and want illegal immigrants, no matter how bad they may be, to pour into and infest our country like MS-13. They can't win on their terrible policies, so they view them as potential votes and voters. And as usual, it's sort of couched as if he might be talking just about MS-13 members, but the language is always there. And you'll remember America First. America First was pseudo-jingoistic, but it referenced horrible movements in this country's past. Infestation is straight out of Nazi language used to dehumanize Jews during the Holocaust. Am I saying Trump is Hitler? No. Am I making an analogy of some kind, which Scott Adams apparently would be displeased with? No, I'm saying he's using the same language about Latino immigrants that Hitler and the Nazis used about Jews. And back in the Holocaust era, Nazis would talk about Jews as rats and vermin and how their presence is an infestation. And this is a trend with Trump. It's when you look at the progression, right, there's his classic, which was something like, I'm paraphrasing, they aren't sending their best people, they're sending the rapists and the criminals, and some, I assume, are good people, something like that. Back in April, I told you about Donald Trump choosing to use the word breeding when referring to Latino immigrants having kids. Once again, it's dehumanizing language referencing animals. And I don't even believe for a second that Trump's coming up with this language on his own. I think that his vocabulary is being seeded by someone at the White House, probably Stephen Miller, but it doesn't matter, right? Because whether Trump is coming up with it himself or he's getting it from somebody else like Stephen Miller, its impact is the same. And when you look back in history at major mass human rights violations, what precedes them is the dehumanization of the targeted group. And that dehumanization starts as linguistic dehumanization. If you don't see them as people, or at least not people like us, then it's more likely that you will look the other way when they're eventually mistreated. And the first colonizers of the United States did it to Native Americans. The Nazis did it to the Jews. Many other examples, Rwanda, Bosnia. This is the pattern. And I hate to break it to everybody who's hearing me say this and they're sort of hoping for or expecting some Republican awakening around this vile language. It's not going to happen. Pat, he has been saying this stuff for a long time, and they voted for him anyway. They don't care about this language.
Oh, they like it. He's appealing to his voters, particularly the ones in the Midwest and the West, you know, that Rust Belt area, those who live in rural communities across the entire country. And many of those people, they may not know a Hispanic person, they may not know a Muslim person, and that's how he gets away with it.
The only way that he will not get away with it is if we vote them out, because the Republicans aren't going to help. And in addition to voting in November, a few other ideas for what you can do. Number one, don't stop emailing, don't stop writing physical letters, don't stop calling your representatives. Demand a bill to stop the policies that are seeing kids separated from their parents and put in de facto internment camps. Do not stop talking about it on social media. The takeovers of websites that we saw around net neutrality, remember websites darking out, blacking out their normal content on a particular day in support of net neutrality? We should be seeing the same thing around this issue. And there are also some organizations that are working on this. If you can donate, then do. We're linking to a bunch of those organizations in the description to the YouTube video for this story. And most importantly, get people registered to vote, as many as you can. Vote.gov. I gave some much more complicated URL earlier in the week. Vote.gov. Vote.gov will tell you exactly what you need to do to get registered in your state and get ready to vote in November. I'm worried that too many people are not going to do it. And I'm increasingly worried about that. And I'm being upfront with you about that because hopefully people will hear me and they'll say, I can't allow that to happen. Not only am I going to vote, I'm going to get other people to vote. But I am increasingly scared about the voter turnout from the left in November.
I'm very worried that the Democrats won't win back the Senate or even the House. And I guess we'll cross that bridge once we get to it.
Yes.
But we got to do it. We got to turn out.
What we know is that there are many bridges we will not be crossing in in 2019 and 2020 if Democrats don't take back the House and Senate in November. I don't know why an attorney general would be talking about this, but Jeff Sessions strangely and bizarrely claimed that Nazis didn't deport Jews during the Holocaust. Why is he saying this? I hope to find out in partnership with you today in the next 5 or 10 minutes. There's this building string of lies about Germany from the Trump administration. Yesterday, I told you that Donald Trump tweeted incorrectly that German crime is way up. The German crime rate is actually the lowest it's been in 26 years. After that, Jeff Sessions was being interviewed about the child internment camps for migrant children by Laura Ingraham on Fox News. That program is quite a beauty, to take a page out of Donald Trump's vocabulary. And Jeff Sessions tries to deny that what's going on right now with children in the United States is anything like what was happening in Nazi concentration camps. Okay. That is something that he was asked about by Laura Ingraham because the comparison had been made by others. Jeff Sessions says that the key difference between what the Nazis were doing during World War II and what the United States is doing now is that the Nazis were preventing the Jews from leaving the country, not deporting them. So, I mean, I guess that's what counts as an explanation in Jeff Sessions' mind. Here's the interview from Fox News with Laura Ingraham. And before I get to that, just so you know that I know it, during the same episode of her program, Laura Ingraham referred to the internment camps as basically summer camps for kids. It's outrageous and ridiculous. I'm not covering that today, just not enough time. But that's just sort of part of the context of this exact same episode of her program. Let's get now to the clip of Jeff Sessions.
This is how your opponents, General Sessions, are demagoguing this issue. Let's listen.
I walked down that railroad siding where the families were separated, and that's why I used that picture. Now, look, I know we're not Nazi Germany, all right? But there is a commonality there.
This is the United States of America. It isn't Nazi Germany, and there's a difference. And we don't take children from their parents until now.
Nazi Germany, concentration camps, human rights violations. Laura Bush has weighed in, Michelle Obama, Rosalind Carter, got all the first ladies going back to Eleanor Roosevelt. She's apparently weighed in as well. General Sessions, what's going on here?
Well, it's a real exaggeration. Of course, in Nazi Germany, they were keeping the Jews from leaving the country. But this is a serious matter. We need to think it through, be rational and thoughtful about it. We want to allow asylum for people who qualify for it.
He had a full minute to think about what to say. He had a full minute during which he knew he was going to get an opportunity to explain why is what we're doing now not like what the Nazis did during World War II. And the distinction he was able to draw between Nazi concentration camps and child internment camps today is that the Nazis were preventing Jews from leaving, whereas part of what the U.S. is doing is deportation. This is, of course, as stupid as it is false. The Nazis did deport millions of Jews from Germany and from other countries to both concentration camps and work camps and death camps all over Europe. It included German Jews, French Jews, Jews from many countries deported en masse to concentration camps all over the place. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Germany, Belgium, France. It wasn't called deportation. It was called evacuation. but it's the same damn thing. And that's where I get back to, even if Jeff Sessions were correct, right? By choosing to say that the difference between Nazi Germany and this is the supposed lack of deportations, all he's saying is we're doing the early Nazi stuff and not the later Nazi stuff. Because there was a point before the Nazis started the deportations. That's not very positive.
But why even answer it in that way? All he has to say is that the Holocaust was a unique moment in history. 6 to 12 million people were killed. They were taken from their homes and gassed and starved to death.
Here we're talking about undocumented people coming in.
Right. That's all you got to do.
He could just say there's nothing whatsoever that's similar. And to say, you know, the difference is back then they weren't doing deportations and now we are. Someone please write to me and tell me history will not look kindly at this. Please tell me that, because if there is going to be any saving grace in this absolute abortion of an American government that we're dealing with right now, I'm hopeful. The only thing I'm optimistic about at this point, other than cautious pseudo-optimism about maybe voting them out in November, the only thing that's in the back of my mind as maybe something positive that could come from this is that what we are observing now is memorialized in history, that history will look back at this for what it is, which is a series of bumbling atrocities, and that it will hopefully prevent it from happening again. And if there's people in the audience who believe that that's going to happen, write to me and tell me that that's what's going to happen. And if you think I'm wrong, if you think that even that isn't going to happen, I'd rather know the truth. Write to me and tell me that as well. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we'll be right back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Randall Griffith. Randall, thank you. This is a program that exists not because of ad deals with major corporations or funding from media conglomerates. It exists because folks like Randall choose to go to www.joinpakman.com and sign up for a membership for only pennies a day. Some members have been with us for a long time. Today's longtime member of the day is Martin Verelst, who has been with us since 2012, going on 6 years. Join Randall and Martin at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code will save you 40%. It is VoteSoon18. And I also would love it if you made a contribution of even just $1 at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Will get us one donor closer to the 2,000 we're targeting before we do a live chess match between me and producers Pat and Max, who will be playing against me in a what is shaping up to be quite a battle. It is time for Hatriot Mail. If you've never heard Hatriot Mail, this is what Hatriot Mail means.
Brace yourselves for the only information that can successfully penetrate a tinfoil hat. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Homophobia, a common tenet of Hatriot Mail, and that is indeed what we have for you today. Let's take a listen.
I happened to catch your show around 2 a.m., and not only was I disgusted, but totally sickened by your liberal lies. First, you little tool, you don't call the president Donnie. Boy, who in the hell do you think K you are? Oh, I know a liberal, lying, little thumb-up-your-ass, Clinton-loving douchebag. You were so off your mark and undereducated, it was pathetic. Jealousy in your voice, in your stance. Maybe you're getting way too much man juice, and it is going to your pea brain. Free speech my ass. You just like any other half F-baked dumbass liberals just cannot accept the fact that your Kilker Clinton lost. Get over it. You are one puke.
Do you think it's in some way cathartic and therapeutic for people to be able to get this vitriol off of their chest by writing to me? Do you think there's some element of that?
I mean, the Hatriot's up at 2 o'clock in the morning. not much else to do.
Like maybe they feel better after writing in and doing that type of thing. I'm imagining it's 2 a.m. They've just seen the show and they are just boiling over with hatred and vitriol. And they write to me, and maybe in some way it is a cathartic and sort of pressure valve releasing experience for them.
He was pretty offended that you called the president Donnie Boy. I'm
yeah.
sure the Hatriot never called Barack Obama
Anything,
Osama
right.
or any negative
and
name.
The only President Barack Obama was the way that that individual referred to President Obama. Hey, if you want to make 15 Hatriots cry, sign up for a membership with the coupon code Hatriot40 when you go to www.joinpacman.com. and type in the coupon code Hatriot40, you save 40% and 15 Hatriots cry. I love this story. Homeland Security Secretary Kristjen Nielsen was shouted out of a Mexican restaurant last night by protesters who were confronting her over the separation from parents and internment camps of children. I don't know how else to say it. It's the separation and the internment of the children that the people were protesting. And the story is exponentially better because it was a Mexican restaurant, although in reality, the facts of the story aren't drastically different, whether it's a Mexican restaurant or an Italian restaurant or a French restaurant. All three of those types of restaurants rely disproportionately on immigrants from Latin America. But there's something about it being a Mexican restaurant that makes it that much better for me. And it was a restaurant called MXDC Cocina Mexicana in Washington, D.C., and one person wrote to me saying that they went to a Mexican restaurant specifically to trigger protests, the idea that this was some well-thought-out idea from Kristjen Nielsen and her staff, to go to a Mexican restaurant to trigger protests so that then they could maybe try to say, we agree with the emotions expressed by the protesters or something like that. I don't think it's that well thought out, and we have video. Nielsen seems to keep her eyes down on her phone while the protesting is going on. Shouts of shame, and if kids don't eat in peace, you don't eat in peace, and it was all captured on video. Check it out.
You spend your evening here eating dinner as you're complicit in the separation and deportation of over 10,000 children separated from their parents. How can you enjoy a Mexican dinner as you're deporting and imprisoning tens of thousands of people who come here seeking asylum in the United States? We call on you to end family separation and abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE! Abolish ICE! Abolish ICE!
Abolish ICE!
Shame! 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 Shame!
Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame! Shame!
Right.
Shame!
Imagine trying to deal with that when you just want your tableside guacamole, right? I mean, what disrespect. And Nielsen's spokesperson tweeted after the incident, while having a work dinner tonight, the secretary and her staff heard from a small group of protesters who share her concern with our current immigration laws that have created a crisis on our southern border. This has exploded into a conversation about free speech. The normal free speech warriors are notably silent in their defense of the protesters, other than saying that this isn't exactly the peaceful speech that they defend and champion. They're saying, some of them, that, listen, this is a restaurant and you're interrupting someone's meal, and that the restaurant is free to handle this however they want. And the restaurant did handle it however they wanted, which was to allow this to go on. The protesters went on for minute after minute after minute, and they were not kicked out. And that was a decision that the restaurant was able to make. And you could say, well, this is rude or it's disrespectful to Kristjen Nielsen, but there's nothing about free speech that says if someone's having enchiladas, you can't say whatever you want as long as you're not physically aggrieving that individual. And excuse me if I lack empathy, but I don't care that she couldn't have a quiet dinner out. She is causing untold strife, is complicit in untold strife with this scale up of the child internment camps and separations from parents. If your claim is she should be shielded from uncomfortable speech when she's hoping to have margaritas at MXDC, then I simply disagree with you. I like that this happened. I like that the restaurant didn't kick out the protesters and let the protest go on for many, many minutes.
Looked like free speech at its best to me, and
Sure.
I think she has a Secret Service around her too, because she's a cabinet secretary
Or
after
some
all.
kind of security anyway.
So we don't have to worry about her safety necessarily, or it looked like she was in good hands at the very least.
There was no physical risk to her whatsoever. There was no indication that the protesters were getting physically violent, and even if they had, she does have a cabinet or whatever you would call DC security, Secret Service. I'm not exactly sure which department it is. I am again reminded, again because it happened to be at not just a Mexican restaurant, but a restaurant in general, about the late Anthony Bourdain, who pointed out many times that there is a hypocrisy with immigration where Latin American immigrants disproportionately grow and harvest a ton of the food that we eat and then cook their fair share of it and more at the restaurants that have received the food that they have helped to grow and harvest. The entire service economy of the United States would collapse were it not for Latin American immigrants, both documented and undocumented. And we hear, oh, they're stealing our jobs and they're dangerous immigrants. When it comes to the restaurant industry, they are single-handedly keeping the industry afloat. And as far as Kristjen Nielsen, she should resign. I have no idea whether she will, but she should. The pressure is on her. We've seen a lot of people who should resign. Scott Pruitt still hasn't resigned from the EPA. There's every indication she will stay, but she should resign.
And if you're going to be complicit in the detention of children, at least have the decency to eat your dinner at home, right?
Yes, just stay home and defrost a pizza or something. Senator Bill Nelson is concerned about the child internment camps that are increasingly being used and set up by the current administration. He's a senator representing the state of Florida. He is a Democrat. And yesterday, he tried to go to one of these internment camps in Florida to see for himself what the living conditions were. He wasn't allowed. He was denied access, not allowed in. And the camp he went to, along with Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, is Homestead Temporary Shelter for Unaccompanied Children. It's another one of these outsourced contractor-run detention centers. And Nelson is now accusing the Trump administration of a deliberate effort to cover up the conditions. Bill Nelson said, quote, "It is an affront as the senior senator of this state that an agency head would tell me that I do not have entrance into a federally funded facility where the lives and health of children are at stake. I think what they're doing is a cover-up for the president." Debbie Wasserman Schultz says that her office spoke to the company that runs the center, and she was told she would have no problem coming in. But Senator Nelson says that the deputy secretary of HHS told him it could take 2 weeks to get them access. The explanation that they received from a former head of HHS administration for children and families is that the policy on paper is you do have to submit a request 2 weeks in advance for a formal examinatory visit. Is examinatory even a word? Formal visit to observe or examine. But that in situations of heightened concern or where there's a particular impetus to demonstrate or to confirm whether conditions are actually even acceptable, that the Department of Homeland of Health and Human Services can and should act quickly, period. They have the full ability to say, we're going to just skip the 2-week thing. The only reason you enforce the 2-week thing is if you want to keep people out.
Yeah, and you know these people are, right? These are members of the United States Congress. I mean, they have every right to go in there. I thought Republicans under Obama, anyway, were all about congressional oversight. Apparently not anymore.
And transparency. And in short, they are now hiding behind a vague protocol where they have both the full authority and ability to get people into the facility if they want to. Not showing people what's going on creates more speculation. You keep people out if the reality is worse than what people might imagine. And I'm reminded of Donald Trump's taxes. The amount of chaos that was caused by Donald Trump not releasing his tax returns during the campaign would only have been worth it if Trump calculated that the complaints over him not releasing the tax returns are better than what would happen if Trump actually released the tax returns. And I started thinking as I read this that the reason you keep people out is if you'd prefer they guess as to what's going on than actually have them see what's going on there. There are probably entire areas where we have no idea what this administration is hiding from us. And what I mean is we know that the number of children being detained in these internment camps is way up under Trump. We know the camps exist. We just aren't sure exactly what the conditions are. What about all of the other stuff that we have no idea whatsoever that the Trump administration is even doing, and we don't even know that they're hiding because we aren't sure where to look? What they admit to is already horrifying. I'm scared of what else there is to find that we don't even have the slightest clue about yet. Send me your thoughts. You can discuss this with us on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick, newly shortened commercial break, and much more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Tamler Sommers, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Houston, also co-hosts the podcast Very Bad Wizards, and is author of the new book, Why Honor Matters. Honor is a super interesting topic, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk to you about it. You know, honor is, in the political world, associated positively with elements of society, and also sometimes negatively with such phenomena as, for example, honor killings in some parts of the world. And I think in order to even start talking about this, Tamler, it's a good idea to first think about what we mean when we say honor. So maybe that's a good place to start. When we talk about honor in society, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, so I was afraid you'd ask that question because it's not an easy thing to answer. It's such a broad, diffuse concept. It's a messy concept, and it is used in so many different ways. I think, honestly, the messiness of it, the complexity of it is one of the reasons why philosophers have shied away from studying it at all. So that's my caveat. The best I can do is give sort of a brief, impressionistic summary of what it is, at least, that I am talking about in the book.
Yes.
So really briefly, your honor within an honor group or honor community is your value or worth to the group. And this is both your perceived worth, so how the group perceives your value, but also your actual worth. There's an objective element to it as well. So somebody in an honor culture who is praised and honored and revered wants to actually be worthy of that, of the merit that is attributed to them. So that's what honor is. You know, if you're talking about how honored am I, that's, I think, what we mean by that. There's also, I think, some characteristic features of more honor-oriented communities in contrast to non-honor communities. So communities where honor is a more central value. So for one thing, they tend to place a higher value on virtues like courage, hospitality, loyalty, integrity, and solidarity with the group. Again, this is on a spectrum, but when you talk about honor cultures, these are the kinds of values and traits that you find are advocated for. There's also a heightened concern for personal reputation and also your group reputation. So how you are perceived within the group is something that matters to you if you're in an honor culture a lot more than it would matter to you if you're in a non-honor culture. And then lastly, along with that comes a heightened sensitivity to insult or slights or challenges to your reputation or to your honor. So one way to move up in an honor hierarchy within a group is to challenge somebody above you, to insult them, And if they don't respond, if they don't stand up for themselves, then you can gain honor at their expense. So honor communities embrace a strong conviction that people should handle their own business, that they should stand up for themselves when they're challenged or insulted, and they are averse to turning to third parties to resolve their own conflicts. So this is why...
I think that's a good. There's I think a lot there to sort of dig into. So to pick one of those things, just because we don't have a completely unlimited amount of time. I'm interested in some of the traits that you connected honor to, like for example, to pick one, solidarity with a group or the group. When I was preparing for this interview, I found that the effect of honor within a group or society is not necessarily positive or negative unless you sort of examine the particulars in terms of how it's applied, sort of like religion, right? You have a group that says, well, religion is what gives purpose to life and enables us to live morally. And then you have others who say, actually, no, religion is completely unnecessary in order to live a moral life. And in thinking about the solidarity with a group, that can be a good or bad thing, right? When one obvious question would be, well, with which group? One could have, as a result of honor, more solidarity towards their religious group, which might cause conflict within the broader population, as an example. So is there any way to start assessing in terms of, in an objective way, the positive and negative impacts of differing degrees of honor in a society?
Well, I think a lot of that will depend on the norms or the code of the particular group in question. So one of the things that is extremely flexible across honor cultures of all sorts is what are the behaviors that and character traits that will bring you more honor, and what are the character traits or behaviors that will bring you shame. So they have these norms for allocating honor within the group. If those norms are immoral norms, so something you mentioned, honor killings, if the code within the group is that a woman who is suspected of having extramarital sex, the family will be shamed unless they kill that woman, that's a terrible norm. It's a morally atrocious norm. And so in that kind of community, what honor causes people to do is going to be something that we should discourage. I mean, this is one of the problems with honor is it doesn't really place any limits inherently on what will bring you honor and what will bring you shame. And so when those things are things that are morally good, then the motivational power of honor becomes a huge advantage. But when they're bad, the motivational power of honor, it becomes something that we need to really worry about.
So within the United States, what would be the sort of primary subcultures or enclaves of society that are more honor-based?
So the military, definitely, for one, sometimes, often explicitly. The Navy SEALs have a honor code that's spelled out. I think sports teams, and especially hockey teams and baseball teams, operate according to a strong honor code, often all these unwritten rules about respect, and there's a lot of collective punishment and collective responsibility and that feeling of loyalty and solidarity. I think you find in inner city or urban neighborhoods, you find a lot of honor communities, honor cultures. Now, sometimes these things emerge by necessity because when you can't depend on law enforcement to keep you safe, people often turn to an honor culture or an honor group as both a form of community, a form of being a part of something, being able to identify with something, but also as a form of protection.
I'm curious about the sports examples you gave. I mean, I follow all of the major sports to some degree, but I'm curious about the ways in which baseball and hockey function more with elements of sort of an honor code than, for example, like basketball and football.
Well, the sort of prime examples in hockey are the way that the fights operate. So there are teammates with very distinct roles. There is the scorer, and the scorer is supposed to score. And there is the agitator. The agitator is supposed to get under the opponent's skin. And then there are the enforcers who are supposed to protect the team, stand up for the team. And if somebody takes a cheap shot at their skill player, or their scorer, or their agitator, then the enforcer's job is to stand up for them. And that is something that they take great pride in, that brings the team together, that bonds the team. And that, so a couple elements in hockey that are really remind me of a well-functioning honor culture. There are all these unwritten rules about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And there's a kind of informal enforcement of those rules through the fights, through the brawls, through the kinds of hits that they'll make on the ice. And the officials have to use a lot of discretion in terms of how to manage it. And whereas in the NBA, if you even step off the bench when there's a tussle, you'll get fined and suspended for the next game. In hockey, the officials are really just trying to figure out what's the best way for them to resolve this dispute, to handle this dispute in a way that everyone will come away as satisfied as possible. Basketball lacks that. Football probably lacks that by necessity, although you could definitely make the case that football is an honor culture as well. Now with baseball, the biggest way is the beanballs and the codes that underwrite when you can hit a player and when you can't. So, a lot of times a player is hit because they show disrespect to the other team, maybe by jogging too slowly around the bases after a home run, maybe by sliding into second base the wrong way. But then also there is this kind of retaliation. If your own player has been hit, the pitcher is expected to go out and hit a batter that's sort of that person's the person who is hit on their own team, their level, their status. Now the pitcher is supposed to hit the opposing player, and even though that opposing player didn't do anything wrong, there's this idea of collective responsibility and collective punishment. So yeah, baseball and hockey are the two examples that I use a lot because of these elaborate, almost Byzantine unwritten codes and all built around the idea of respect and accountability.
Last thing I want to touch on in the very limited time we have left are rules that are established through a sort of honor infrastructure more difficult to dislodge than non-honor-based rules. So like as an example, if it's considered dishonorable for women to work outside the home in a society, is that going to be more difficult to dislodge based on it being a sort of honor rule than other types of rules?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so, because so much of the way rules or norms in honor cultures, they're often either unwritten or informal. They're constantly evolving and constantly the subject of debate and dispute within the community. Whereas in a non-honor culture, there's often legal bureaucracy to get around to change a rule even that everybody knows is unjust. I mean, think of marijuana laws or something and how long it's taken to get, and now, there's a lot of acceleration, but all the legal hurdles you have to jump through to change a rule that, has very little support within the population. You just don't often have that in honor cultures because they don't approach legislation in such a bureaucratic way.
Absolutely fascinating topic. The book is Why Honor Matters. We've been speaking with the book's author, Tamler Sommers, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Houston. You can also check out the podcast, which he co-hosts, Very Bad Wizards. So great to talk to you about this.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have truly shocking news for you. Americans make up 4% of the world's population, but own 40% of all the guns, meaning that Americans are overrepresented by 10 times in gun ownership. And what's actually shocking to me is how low the number is, because if you consider how American gun culture is so totally out of whack with gun culture in most parts of the world, I actually wouldn't have been that surprised if Americans had more than 50 or 60% of the world guns. And some other interesting data from the study, which was done by the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland, there are more than 1 billion firearms on the planet. 85% of those are owned by civilians. That's about 850 million civilian guns. About 400 million of those are in the United States, which is more than the number of civilian-owned firearms held by citizens in the next 25 countries combined. And this is, of course, forgetting that there are a ton of unregistered guns that probably aren't even showing up in this data in the United States. And of course, you could make that same argument about other countries as well. The guns that Americans own are also on average more powerful than in other countries because there's lots of firearms you can get in the US that you cannot get, at least not legally, in other countries. So the good news is that we are going to be very, very ready to defend ourselves if government becomes tyrannical. Of course, the only problem is that our current government has major tyrannical tendencies, and the people with the guns actually seem to be in support of those tyrannical tendencies. And as I was reading this data, I thought about how Americans' relationship to guns is similar to the American government's relationship to nuclear weapons. We have roughly 4,000 nuclear weapons in the United States, or controlled by the United States, not all necessarily in the United States. We don't know. That's rivaled only by Russia. Orders of magnitude more nukes than almost any other country that has nukes has. And of course, most countries have 0 nukes altogether. And it's just something to brag about, like having tons of guns. In the same way that the 400 million guns will never be used in the US in any realistic scenario, the 4,000 nukes also aren't going to be used. There's no circumstance where you need or could even use 4,000 nukes. It's more than enough to destroy the entire planet many times over. But yet, the sort of jingoistic nationalists love having more, whether it's nukes or guns. And there is a very similar sort of dynamic there.
So given that there are more guns than people in the United States, can conservatives rest easy that there won't be any major confiscation program or even like a gun buyback program? Because it's just not politically feasible. Any gun control will be from any guns here forward, right? Everything else will be grandfathered in.
No, because all of those extra guns, you might say 400 million guns, only 325 million people. That includes also toddlers and babies who presumably wouldn't get guns. What about arming gorillas? Gorillas share many traits with Homo sapiens, and you could absolutely train a gorilla to own, to fire a gun and help in the defense against that tyrannical government. But back to reality, you don't become the most feared and powerful nation in the world by stockpiling flowers, right? It's by stockpiling guns. And some of the countries with the fewest firearms by percentage are Japan and Indonesia, total beta cuck countries. We have the guns, and we are the equivalent of the alpha male in geopolitics. Think about where Americans are overrepresented around the world. 4% of the population and 40% of the guns. Got it. 4% of the population and 25% of the world's known prison population. I know that some countries have people who are imprisoned and it's not part of the official numbers, but 4% of the population in the US, 25% of the known world prison population. Not great. Absolutely not great.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wish we were number one in healthcare,
Yeah, I know.
education, technological advancements.
Yep.
But, you know, this is a saving grace, I guess. We're number one in guns.
Keep wishing, because the areas where we excel are areas where we would usually, we compete with countries we don't normally compare ourselves to, I think is the best way to put it. Let's talk about false rape and sexual assault accusations. My position on this issue has been clear for a very long time. Unless I have a specific reason to disbelieve a rape or sexual assault accuser, my default is to trust the victims. Why? Because false rape accusations are relatively rare, because I know that there is massive stigma for people even coming forward about being the victims of sexual assault and rape. And as I've said before, any social welfare system is going to have some free riders. Any crime reporting system is going to have some false reports. But mathematically, we need to consider whether we would upend those systems as a result of that small percentage of people. However, and this is where now some on the left may not be so pleased with me, I have also said that when there are known false rape allegations, it has to be taken seriously by the criminal justice system, because in the same way that we want to reduce the stigma around reporting of sexual assault so that victims feel more comfortable coming forward, we need to make it absolutely clear as a society that false accusations cannot be tolerated. A woman has now been sent to jail for 45 days for making up a story about being raped by a black man in a Delta College parking lot. I'm talking about 21-year-old Mary Zolkowski, who's been sentenced to not only those 45 days in jail, but also 2 years of probation with 220 days of deferred jail, meaning if she violates probation, she would have to serve 220 additional days. And as we now understand the story, Zolkowski says she was previously sexually assaulted, not anybody on the Delta College campus, not a black guy, but that she was ashamed to come forward initially and ended up apparently projecting a prior sexual assault onto a vague black man on the college campus. It now is unclear whether she was even actually sexually assaulted prior to the accusation of rape that she made against this amorphous black man on the Delta College campus. Police heard her story originally, started investigating it, and found absolutely no evidence whatsoever. They actually did find a black guy with a criminal record on the Delta College campus, brought him in for a polygraph test, which the guy passed, and ultimately Zolkowski admitted to police that the story is not true. This has to be taken very seriously. And if there's any argument to be made, it's that 45 days isn't enough. And the reason why I think it may not be enough is that the person who could have ended up in prison based on the false rape claim could have gotten 20 years in prison.
Wow.
And the only case for 45 days instead of more for this woman would be that, number one, as prescribed by the law, the max she could have gotten was 6 months for false reporting of a felony. That's how the law is currently written. And number two, her lawyer said that she suffers from bipolar disorder. And I am 100% sensitive to the impact of mental illness on behavior. But the primary point is you can, like me, have your default tendency be that you trust the victims, but you can still recognize that false accusations exist and have to be taken seriously. And this is yet another one of these political footballs. You've got the men's rights activist world. You've got this sort of Venn diagram of the Gamergate, alt-right, anti-SJW enclave. They will often push the idea that either you're against the false rape accusations or you don't care about them and you blindly believe every victim. The reality is more complex. The reality is that false rape accusations are rare, but they exist. And by default, we trust but verify when it comes to victims. And that's what police did here, right? When you turn up false accusations, you prosecute them. In this case, it's the false reporting of a felony, which is the way the law is written. But the system worked as designed, at least in this case. If you don't think that that's true, if you believe that even this case is representative of a problem within the system, then let me know. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Let me know on my Instagram page, David Pacman, wherever. But I think that this is actually evidence that the system worked, that these false allegations are relatively rare, and the system caught it, and the perpetrator is being punished. We can debate whether the punishment is just, whether it's too harsh or not harsh enough, but the system did work in this case. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I received a voicemail about what at least one caller believes is the undoubted future re-election of President Donald Trump. Let's take a listen to it.
I don't support Trump, but I'm pretty confident he's likely to get reelected if things are as they are now in 2020. I mean, as much as the left likes to say the economy is terrible, it's really not. And I don't think a lot of people buy these arguments that the left is making that the economy is so bad. His poll numbers continue to increase, and I don't think the left has any idea how to oppose him.
Yeah. The poll numbers are sort of just between 38 and 40%. I'm not seeing any kind of steady increase, but I actually am very worried that the caller is correct. Humans suffer from a cognitive bias called peak end bias, which is that they will often make decisions about a lot of things as to how it ended. This includes a medical procedure. If it ended not being that bad, even if it was really bad for the first 80%, people's recollection of it will often be of it not being that bad. The same thing happens with the election or re-election of presidents, where there will be a significant focus in deciding whether to vote for re-election or not on the last 6 months or even the last 12 months. If there's a good economy in the last 12 months, people will often forget or sort of block out or not consider everything that happened during the first 3 years or 3.5 years. I think that there is a lot to that. And I've been saying it, Pat. I've been saying it, that the solution is to vote the people out that are doing the horrible things. And I'm worried it's not going to happen in November, and I'm worried it's not going to happen in 2020 either.
It's hard to predict this far out, that's for sure. But I would say it's maybe 50-50 right now. Sure, a lot of people hate Trump, but he has a lot of sycophantic supporters too. And the last 3 presidents got their re-election run. So
as a general
there's a good
thing,
chance.
There's power of incumbency. Like put Trump totally aside for a second. There's the power of incumbency. There's the power of raising more money. We know that in American politics, the candidate who raises more money overwhelmingly tends to win. And then, of course, you have some of these other biases and heuristics that people like Daniel Kahneman have pointed out to us. So I am extraordinarily concerned. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We will talk about former FBI agent Peter Strzok, formerly of the Robert Mueller investigation, being escorted out of FBI headquarters. We will talk about a very interesting study related to confirmation bias and facts versus opinion. And I also want to talk about this Ted Cruz, Jimmy Kimmel charity basketball one-on-one match that they played. And I get that it was, in a sense, literally fun and games. It was a game of basketball after all. But I'm a little bit disgusted with some elements of it. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. Sign up at www.joinpacman.com or make a pledge at patreon.com/DavidPacmanShow.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.